I recently started seeing this guy, and something happened the other night that I just have to tell you about. We were just hanging out on his couch, talking, when all of a sudden his phone just slid, like completely on its own, across a totally flat table. I just stared at it, and he just sighed and said, "Yeah, that happens. I'm pretty sure my house is haunted." He then started listing off all these weird little things that have happened since he moved in. Objects moving, strange noises, that kind of thing. So naturally this led to us swapping ghost stories. Let me tell you, I was not prepared for the story he was about to share. One of the most genuinely chilling things I've ever heard. He told me this happened back when he was in high school. His parents were out of town for the weekend, so he had the house to himself. He had a buddy over, and like typical high school kids, they were just hanging out, maybe having a few drinks they shouldn't have been. After a while, his friend decided to head home. Not long after his friend left, the house phone rang. It was his girlfriend at the time. She sounded pretty serious and said they needed to talk and that she was on her way over. So he hangs up the phone and goes to wait for her on the living room couch. A little while later, he hears a knock at the front door. He gets up, figuring it's her, and opens it. There was no one there. Absolutely nobody. The porch light was on. The street was empty. Just nothing. He was confused, maybe a little annoyed, thinking it was a prank. So he shuts the door, locks it, and goes back to sit on the couch. As he's sitting down, he catches a flicker of movement out of the corner of his eye. He whips his head around to look, and what he saw. I still get goosebumps thinking about it. Standing right there in the middle of his living room was a man. He was dressed impeccably in a full suit and tie. But the most terrifying part, he said, was the man's face. He was just standing there, completely silent, with this huge, unnatural smile plastered across his face. He said it wasn't a friendly smile. It was wide and wrong, and just radiated pure malice. He was completely frozen, just staring at this impossible figure standing only a few feet in front of him. Couldn't move, couldn't scream, couldn't even breathe. It felt like time itself had just stopped. And then, just as suddenly as it appeared, there was another knock at the door. It was louder this time, more insistent. The sound was so jarring that it was like a shock to his system. It snapped him back to reality. Blink, and the man in the suit was gone, vanished. The living room was empty again. Shaking, he stumbled back to the door and looked through the peephole this time. It was his girlfriend. He flung the door open, probably looking like he'd just seen a ghost witch. I guess he had. He immediately tried to explain what had just happened, what he'd seen standing right there in the living room. She, of course, didn't believe him. She thought he was just drunk or trying to mess with her. She checked the whole house, but there was no one there. No sign of anyone. They ended up having their talk, but he said he could unshake the feeling of that smiling man for the rest of the night. A few days later, he was telling his grandmother about the experience. Now, his grandmother primarily speaks Spanish, and at the time, his Spanish was pretty broken, so he was stumbling through the story, trying his best to describe the man in the suit and the horrible smile. But before he could even get to the part about him disappearing, his grandmother's face went pale. She grabbed his arm and started repeating in a panicked voice, "El Diablo. That's the devil, and that's the devil." And then she told him her own story, a story that made his experience even more terrifying. She said this happened when she was a young woman back in her hometown in Mexico. There was a popular nightclub that she and her friends loved to go to. One night, they were all there, dancing and having a good time. While they were at the bar getting drinks, they were approached by a man. She said he was incredibly handsome, impossibly charming, and just like the man in her grandson's story, he was dressed to the nines in a beautiful suit. He had this magnetic personality, and one of her friends was immediately smitten with him. But as he was talking, the grandmother's other friend leaned over and whispered to her that something felt off about him. Something wasn't right. She told the grandmother, "Look down, look at his legs." So my guy's grandmother subtly glanced down under the bar. What she saw made her blood run cold. She said one of the man's legs was normal, but the other one wasn't. She described it as being thin and scaly, like a chicken's leg. And his foot on that leg was a cloven hoof, like a goat's. The one friend was so taken with this man that she didn't notice, or maybe didn't care. Seeing how creeped out her other friend was, the grandmother made an excuse that they needed to go to the bathroom. They left the smitten friend talking and laughing with the handsome stranger at the bar. They were only in the bathroom for a minute or two when they heard it, the sound of chaos. People were screaming. They rushed out of the bathroom and the scene was pure pandemonium. The nightclub was on fire. Flames were everywhere, spreading impossibly fast. People were stampeding for the exits. In the chaos, they looked for their friend, but she was gone, and so was the handsome man in the suit. They managed to escape, but the entire building burned to the ground that night. It was a massive tragedy. And in the aftermath, their friend, who had stayed with the man, was never seen or heard from again. Her body was never found in the ashes. It was as if she and the charming man in the suit had simply vanished into the flames. So when her grandson described seeing a smiling man in a suit appear in his living room, she knew exactly what it was. A being that lures you in with charm and a handsome face, but hides something monstrous underneath. a being that shows up just before tragedy strikes. The fact that his girlfriend knocked on the door right at that moment might have been the only thing that saved him. I swear, when he finished telling me that, I couldn't speak for a solid minute. I just sat there, thinking about that smiling man. 2 generations, 2 different countries, but the same terrifying figure. It really makes you wonder what's out there, doesn't it? What do you guys think? Have you ever heard stories like this? Let me know down in the comments. Thanks so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this story, please hit that like button and subscribe for more. I'll see you in the next one.